Good afternoon and welcome to another Workshop Wednesday at Fitness Together here in Ashland. First and foremost, great news. As I mentioned last week, we were anticipating an opening this week and we are in fact open. So we did open for clients for personal one-on-one training on Monday. Several people have come in and it's going great. So we're happy to have everybody back and we welcome others to set an appointment as well. But we're here today to talk about dissecting the deadlift. We talked a little bit last week in our golf conditioning workshop about the deadlift and about some exercises to do. A little bit deeper today as to what a deadlift is, why we do it, and how it can help the lower back, especially when done properly. And maybe give you some tips as to some different exercises that you can do to help progress your ability to properly do the deadlift. So to start off, what is a deadlift? A deadlift is a hip hinge pattern, meaning that when you come over, as opposed to a squat in bending your knees, a hinge is more from the hips, sticking your rear end out to perform the exercise. Now, most people, you see the bar behind me, the Olympic bar, most people know to do a deadlift with a bar like that, and typically that's what we often see when we go to the gym, are people doing deadlifts with big, heavy Olympic bars with a lot of weight on them. As I said, what I want to show today are some better ways to do that, why we would even do a deadlift. Primarily, it's not only to learn the hinge pattern, but in doing so, we're learning how to integrate our SI joint, so our sacroiliac joint, right? So our low back, our core, our abdominal area, our deeper abdominal muscles that we've talked about in other workshop series, but also our lats, our upper back, and our glutes and our hamstrings. So integrating that entire posterior chain in the performance of that hip hinge will help us protect our back, but also teach us how to develop more power in our glutes and hamstrings so that when we're lifting things from the ground, we can spare our low back in performing that exercise. So better ways that we can do the deadlift. Last week I showed that you can use a golf club or a dowel to progress the deadlift position or that hip hinge. And as I said, what's most important with any type of hinging position or any type of maneuver where you're picking things up off the ground, I think we could all agree that anytime you try to bend over, if you're arching your back, if there's any flexion in your spine, that is a recipe for disaster for your lower back. So we want to work on exercises to prevent that from happening. So the easiest way to do that, or the way that we start out with people here at Fitness Together, is to use a dowel like this where we can position that along the back, along the spine, so it's in contact with both the hips and the head. And when I separate my feet to about hip width apart, and I hinge my hips back with a slight knee bend, maintaining contact with the dowel at all times is the proper form for that hip hinge. So this right here is a basic deadlift, right, or a hip hinge position. And we want to start off by teaching people the proper form for that before we even think about lifting any type of weight for a deadlift. Right? Now we can progress that to a single leg version as well, using the dowel again and positioning it right alongside my toes. I turn this way, you might see it better. Right? And using my hand to brace here as I come over. My form will stay intact. So I'm trying to teach myself how to, in a way, do a dynamic plank. So most people think of a plank as being set on the floor in a nice flat position. I want to hold that same flat position here, using the dowel as my guide, coming out over the top with, again, a slight little knee bend on the stationary leg. So those two exercises right there, just with a dowel, are good both bilateral and unilateral single leg ways of learning how to do a deadlift. But then we can progress from there using some weights. And the way that we would do that, and the way that I like to do it, is to first use a sandbag. And the reason for the sandbag, what's great about it is that it's got these different handle positions. And what we can do with the sandbag is we can grab, not only integrate our upper body with the lower body exercises, but we can use the handles to pull apart the sandbag and get more action from our hands and from our lats, right, from our upper back when we're doing the hinge. And the first way that we would do that is to just first step back a little bit. So of course we can do a regular deadlift here, right? But what starts to happen with this bag is it gets very easy to arch that back over, which I said before I want to be careful about. So starting out, the easiest way to do this, and the other reason why we prefer a lot of unilateral work is because if you think about how we move or how we move most often in real life, right, what's the thing that we're doing most is we're walking. Right? So as we're walking, as we're striding, we want to make sure that we always have a solid core. Or for those runners out there, right, when you're running, you don't want to be wobbling from side to side. You want to hold your core and your upper torso as upright as possible as you're running. So every exercise that we do as we're walking, we want to maintain that structure between our core, our hips, and our lower body. So if I use the sandbag, I can start to train those things by pulling apart the handles, slightly stepping back, holding my back nice and flat, and performing that same type of deadlift, that same type of hip hinge, where I step back just a little bit to my toes, push my hips back, pull the handles apart, and come forward. So to progress that to a little bit more balance, I would just simply do the same thing by engaging the handles and now lifting the leg off the ground, coming out over the top. Right? But this way, again, I'm still using the muscles in my upper back, my lats, in my shoulders to pull apart the handles, right? And stabilizing with my hips and my SI joint. Right? If I want to progress that to something with a little bit more motion, as I said, because the idea is being able to stabilize our bodies through walking and running, I would just simply take a step forward, hinge back, hold the weight tight, step forward, hinge, moving across the room. Those are the first three phases of learning how to do a deadlift. The next three, the exercises themselves are the same, but we would start with a different position of the weight. So if I bring the weight up high, this we call more of a good morning position or a racked position. And we would start the process all over again, where we would first step back and come over the top. Having the weight up here is a lot more challenging. It's even more important to hold that back nice and tight. The weight up high here really makes you want to slump over. So it's more critical to pull that bag into your chest, to hold it real tight as you step back and come over the top. And this is right about here where my back wants to give out. So I have to be really conscious to hold up high. And in doing so, it also puts a lot more demand on the glutes and the hamstrings. So as I did before, I would move from that step back hinge to more of a single leg deadlift or hinge. And then follow through with the walking position. Now, if we wanted to take that even further, all right, we can again move to a lighter sandbag. And in this case, I'm going to hold the outside handle, or just inside the handles on the ends, but I can pull the bag apart again. And now I'm going to go fully overhead when I do my deadlift. And again, getting that weight further away from my body, and it creates even more demand in my back to maintain that dynamic plank as I move through the motion. So as I tip over, again, I engage the bag, lift as high as possible, and come back through. Okay. So again, the point, the reason why we would start with the sandbag, the reason why I've just shown you 7 different progressions, or really 9 if you include the dowel, because all of those things will help to develop from the shoulders down to the knees, and even to the feet, that engagement with the ground, of ways that we want to progress the deadlift, but ways that we can condition the trunk to function properly with the lower body. Again, the reason why that's so critical is because the biggest mistake I see when we move to the barbell, right, is that people use the barbell and they just want to keep increasing the weight. Right? And again, I understand why they might want to do that, right? Because strength is often associated with how much weight we can lift. The problem being that as the weight increases, form usually decreases. And that desire to lift that heavier weight, to feel stronger, to be stronger, a lot of compensations start to take place. Whereas when we progress with the sandbags, oftentimes we're lowering the weight because the exercise and the movement pattern itself is more difficult. But once we've done all those prerequisite exercises with the sandbag, and we've strengthened up our body through different motions or different movement patterns, it's then safe enough to move to a barbell, because now you'll better understand how to support yourself when you're lifting the weight on the bar. So once we've done that, I'll turn this sideways, it might be able to demonstrate it better. We would essentially set up the same way in that deep hinge pattern, the back nice and flat, engaging the upper body with the lower body, right? Screwing my feet into the floor so that my hips are nice and tight, and I can follow through with that move from a bilateral position. But as I started with, I think it's most critical that people learn how to hinge first, to hinge through different movement patterns, things that are going to translate to real world or real life experiences and movements that you're doing every day, and then ultimately work towards an Olympic bar where you can better handle the weight and not make the mistakes that so often people are doing when they're compensating for muscles, for the deeper muscles that haven't been trained quite properly yet. If you'd like more information about how we progress the deadlift, or how to do a proper deadlift, or any other exercise that you've seen us do here in the video series, or would like to schedule some time with us now that we're open and fitness together, I'll put my information up, but you can certainly contact me. We'd love to see you here in the studio, or even virtually, but I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks.